Hey there, I'm Evan, and this is a summary of the design of my game Blokgical. Blokgical is a 2D top-down puzzle game that has been created to appeal to a wide demographic. It was built using Unity and it was initially planned to be released on mobile devices, but given that the dev window was only about 6 weeks, a lot of compromises were made. For example, the game is now only on PC. It was meant to feature a level creator that would allow people to create stages and send them to their friends, but there wasn't enough time to implement this. Essentially, Blokgical is a linear game that challenges the player to solve puzzles. The puzzles are born from the many interactions between its block types. For example, the player can grab a power-up that will allow them to push objects around, but also being powered up will allow them to pass through a laser of the same colour. The player themselves has to be the correct colour when they touch the exit block, and the exit block can have its colour changed by a laser. For gameplay, the idea was to teach the player how the rules of the game work without using words. In the first level, using the mouse and the arrow keys will be the player's first instinct. The player is surrounded by empty space, which is an affordance because it means that clicking any of the arrow keys will result in visual feedback when the character moves via the arrow keys. In order to demonstrate the workings of the game, I tried to reduce the amount of choices the player can make at the start. Choosing to walk through a laser without changing colour will result in the player having to restart. Likewise, attempting to push the block without the red power in the beginning will not work. Later in the game, the decision logic is a lot more complicated. Brute forcing the decision tree will take much longer than it did in the earlier levels, and as a result the player will have to plan a strategy to succeed. The difficulty spike is intentional and meant to demonstrate how crazy the puzzles can become when you start combining ideas. While I was designing the levels, I noticed emergent gameplay hiding in my predefined game mechanics. Emergent gameplay is when events in the game unfold in a specific way that weren't intended by the designer. For example, I realized when the player is using a block to retrieve other blocks that are behind a laser, one block will always be left behind if the player is a different color from the laser. When I noticed this, I actually based the last level around this idea. Aesthetically, Blokgical features pixel art and chiptunes as an attempt to look cute and stylish for a wide range of players. To create the visuals of the game, I worked closely with my brother who volunteered to do the pixel art. The visuals of the game feature many affordances that are meant to help the player understand what things are and what to focus on. For example, the blank cells that the player can walk around on look like tiles, which is a common structure that people walk on. The pushable blocks have arrows on them that indicate that they can move. The walls look like they have been sewn into the game and therefore cannot move. The important blocks in the level, such as the power-up block, laser and exit, are all animated, which draws the eye to them and indicates that they do something. When the player is powered up and steps into the laser, it looks like the laser is travelling around the player and therefore not harming them. We chose a vibrant colour palette to communicate that the game is fun, but also added in a few shades of grey to make everything feel a bit more technological, which communicates that the game is sophisticated. I also created the music of Blokgical to tie into the game's themes of fun and sophistication. I made 2 chiptune tracks using harmonic ideas such as chromatic medians, which is just a fancy way of saying unexpected jazzy chord progressions. This unexpectedness is meant to relate to the process of solving puzzles in the game. When the player is faced with a challenge, the solution may feel a bit strange at first, but in hindsight it makes logical sense, just like the chord progression. Rhythmically, the 2 compositions vary in complexity. For the menu music, I chose to use quintuplets because to me they sound computerized and technical but still groovy. Combining them with a metric modulation later in the track simplifies the feel, as the piece moves from sounding unresolved to resolved, like a puzzle. For the in-game music, I just used 4/4 and didn't do anything crazy because I didn't want the player to feel overwhelmed by the music while they were solving a puzzle. I initially wanted to create the sound effects for the game myself too, but in the end I ran out of time. So, as I've done in the past, the sound effects were lifted from Rayman 2, my favourite game. The main challenges with this project were to do with programming and visual design. I went through many iterations of code just to get a working environment where the player can move and push blocks. In the end, I used a 2-dimensional array to store the values of certain blocks and a bunch of different functions that manipulate these values and then tell the engine to put the correct things on the screen. Something as simple as the discrete mechanic of pushing blocks around turned out to be very difficult for me as a beginner programmer. As for the visuals, it was very difficult to get all the sprites to look good together. While they all looked nice individually, we found that putting them all together was a bit of a visual overload for the eyes. Some sprites were quite detailed while others were simple. Some had depth and some looked more flat. The colours didn't always fit together well, and it took us a while to work on the unity of everything. In conclusion, I worked really hard on the game and I'm pretty happy with the result, even though it's only the alpha release. I would like to continue making the game because there are heaps of things that would make it a more complete experience for the full release. Here's a list of those things. Thanks for watching.